Jackson Ferris always said that if the universe had a grand design, it was made by a drunk, blindfolded engineer with a malfunctioning laser cutter. His proof? The intergalactic repository of abandoned trash, or as locals lovingly called it, Junkberg, a scrapyard planet where everything from decommissioned warships to malfunctioning espresso machines found their final resting place. For Jackson, Junkberg wasn't just home. It was a place where dreams, and by dreams he meant profit, came wrapped in rusted steel and exposed wiring. He had one golden rule: never buy anything that looks like it's still functional. If it works, someone probably wants it back. That was why, when the derelict starship came up for auction at Slag's Discount Rex, Jackson had every intention of sticking to his rule. Then he saw the price. This beauty here, Slag, a four-armed amphiboid, croaked, smacking the ship's hull with a greasy appendage, is an absolute steel, classic pre-Annihilix Wars model. A few scuffs, maybe a little mysterious hull damage, but nothing a talented mechanic like you can't fix. Jackson peered inside. The open airlock smells like something died in there. Slag waved a dismissive hand. That's history, my friend. That's character. I'll throw in an air freshener. Jackson tapped his chin. His gut told him this was a monumentally bad idea. His wallet, however, was screaming, "Buy it or starve, idiot." "Fine," he muttered. "I'll take it." Jackson spent the next 2 hours violently regretting his decision. The ship's interior was worse than he expected. The power core was fried, the gravity stabilizers were barely holding together with duct tape, and the AI on board kept asking existential questions about the meaning of life before abruptly shutting down. But the real kicker? A stasis pod. 1. With a blinking red light, Jackson groaned. The only thing worse than accidentally buying something valuable was accidentally buying something alive. The pod emitted a long, drawn-out hiss as the lid slid open. Inside was not what Jackson expected. 1. It was huge. 7 feet of solid, muscle-packed alien warbeast, covered in cybernetic plating and scars that screamed, "I have killed things the size of buildings." Its fur was dark, eyes glowing gold, and when it stretched, Jackson swore he heard metal creak. Then it opened its mouth. "Oh, good," it rumbled. "I'm not dead." Jackson, who was already halfway into cardiac arrest, nodded weakly. Yeah, congrats." The war beast rolled its shoulders, flexing claws that looked entirely too efficient at slicing through bone. "You're not one of the Emperor's lackeys," Jackson blinked. "Who now?" The beast let out a low, satisfied growl. "Good, then I don't have to kill you." Jackson very much appreciated not being killed. "Okay, cool. Good start. Now, before we get into anything, who exactly are you?" The beast cracked its neck. "I am Nova of the Drazulian war beasts, engineered to wage war, betrayed and imprisoned, left to rot by the Celestian Dominion." Jackson ran a hand down his face. "Fantastic. Of course by the one ship in the galaxy that comes with a legendary murder monster in cryo-sleep." Nova's ears twitched. "I prefer battle-hardened warrior, thank you," Jackson sighed. "Great. Well, I hate to break it to you, but this ship's scrap. It barely functions." Nova glanced around the rust-covered walls, then back at Jackson. "Then fix it," Jackson snorted. "Oh, sure. Let me just conjure up a functional hyperdrive from thin air while simultaneously trying not to die of radiation." "Poisoning." Nova's glowing eyes narrowed. "Did you not just purchase this vessel?" "Yeah, but I didn't know it came with baggage." Jackson gestured wildly. "I was expecting rust and broken circuits, not a freaking biological war." "Crime in a can!" Nova crossed his arms. "Would you prefer I return to the pod?" Jackson hesitated. "No." "Then we're allies." Jackson rubbed his temples. "I don't think that's how alliances work." Nova ignored him, stepping past Jackson and tapping into the ship's controls. The decrepit AI sputtered to life. Welcome back, user. Initializing systems. Please provide a blood sample for... Nova punched the console. Sparks flew. The AI shut up. Jackson let out a slow breath. I'm gonna die. Nova grinned. Not if you're useful. As it turned out, Jackson was useful. At least, useful enough for Nova not to eat him. Over the next few hours, he managed to get the ship's thrusters operational and patch the oxygen leaks with a little bit of duct tape and a lot of swearing. That was the good news. The bad news? The moment they powered up the ship, alarms started blaring. Incoming transmission, Origin, Celestian Dominion Hunter Squadron. A voice crackled over the comms. Unregistered vessel, this is the Celestian Inquisition. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Jackson turned to Nova. I take it these are your guys. Nova cracked his knuckles. They wish they were. Jackson swallowed. Cool, great. Well, I hope you have a plan, because I'm fresh out. Nova's grin widened, showing way too many teeth. Simple. He slammed his fist onto the ship's control panel. Outside, the ship's malfunctioning, jury-rigged weapon systems activated all at once. A half-dozen plasma turrets exploded simultaneously, sending debris flying in every direction. The Celestian ship scrambled, alarms screaming. Nova grabbed Jackson by the collar and hurled him into the pilot's seat. Fly, Jackson yelped. Oh, sure, let me just navigate this death trap with no training. Nova patted him on the back. You'll figure it out. Jackson slammed his hands onto the controls and prayed to whatever cosmic entity was least likely to smite him. The ship lurched forward, engines belching smoke and plasma as the Celestian squadron opened fire. Jackson screamed. Nova laughed. The chase was on. The ship screamed through the junk-choked skies of Junkberg like a drunk comet on fire. The controls bucked under Jackson's grip, sparks flying from a nearby panel, while the engines wheezed and spat like they were personally offended by being asked to work. Behind them, the Celestian Inquisition Squadron was in hot pursuit, their sleek black fighters cutting through the debris field with the kind of terrifying precision that suggested they'd done this before. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the comms again. Unidentified vessel, you are harboring a fugitive of the Celestian Dominion. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Jackson, white-knuckling the yoke, turned to Nova. Okay, buddy. I don't mean to question your whole feral warbeast thing, but what exactly is your plan here? Nova, unbothered by their impending death, flexed his claws and smirked. We dodge, we fight, we escape. Jackson let out a short, hysterical laugh. Oh, cool. I love that plan. Except for the part where this ship has the handling of a dead space whale and... Oh, look! We're about to die! A bright plasma bolt shot past their port side, missing them by a few meters. The ship's AI, still suffering from Nova's earlier attempt at fixing it, flickered to life with the most unhelpful alert possible. Warning, hull integrity at 78%. Would you like to initiate emergency landing protocols? Jackson gritted his teeth. Oh, wow, thanks. Maybe we should just park and invite them in for tea. Nova cracked his neck. If you wish. That was sarcasm. Nova ignored him. Instead, he lunged toward the weapons console, slamming his fist onto what Jackson hoped was a targeting control and not the self-destruct button. Outside, one of their half-functioning plasma cannons coughed to life and immediately spat a projectile. Backward, the ship bucked violently as their own plasma bolt exploded behind them, taking out a pursuing fighter in the most accidental yet efficient way possible. There was a long pause over the comms. Then, did they just shoot themselves? One of the Inquisition pilots asked. Negative, another replied. That was a tactical, maneuver. Jackson blinked. We just killed a guy. Nova clapped him on the shoulder. Yes, well done. I don't think that was my fault. Another blast rocked the ship, throwing them both forward. The Celestians weren't laughing anymore. Their fighters weaved through the debris field, launching controlled bursts of fire, trying to disable rather than destroy. Nova studied their movement, analyzing. They want us alive. Fantastic. Jackson grumbled. I love a slow death. A new alarm blared to life, this one particularly shrill and aggressive. Incoming lock-on detected. Evasive maneuvers recommended. Probability of survival, 12%. Have a nice day. Jackson grabbed the yoke, yanking it to the right just as a missile roared past, missing by sheer luck. Nova, unfazed, studied their surroundings and then grinned. There! That ship! Jackson followed his gaze. Through the clouds of floating wreckage, a massive derelict battleship loomed, a rusted beast of old war, long abandoned. Its broken hull gaped open like a cavern, its interior lost in shadow. Jackson's brain immediately rejected the idea. Oh no, 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 you are not suggesting. Nova's grin widened. We fly through it. That is a 200-year-old death trap. Nova raised a brow. Are you afraid? Jackson let out an unhinged laugh. Yes, I am, aren't you? Nova's only response was to slam the throttle forward. The ship lurched ahead, and before Jackson could scream any more protests, they were diving into the dark metal graveyard. Inside, the wreck was a twisted labyrinth of collapsed corridors, shattered bulkheads, and floating debris. Jackson barely kept them from colliding with a rogue escape pod that probably hadn't been used since before his grandparents were born. Behind them, the Celestian fighters hesitated. They wouldn't follow us, Jackson muttered, sweating. They'd be insane to follow us. The Celestians followed them. Jackson threw his hands in the air. Of course they do. Nova was grinning like this was the best day of his life. Jackson yanked the controls left to avoid a falling bulkhead, right to dodge a drifting fuel tank, then straight down through a gaping corridor that had no business being big enough for a ship to fit through. One of the Celestian fighters wasn't so lucky. It clipped a wall at high speed, spiraling out of control before smashing into an ancient reactor core. The entire wreck began shaking. Jackson's stomach dropped. Nova! Yes? The ship is going to explode. Nova tilted his head. Then we should leave. Oh, really? Should we? The wreck systems, long dead, briefly sputtered to life, red warning lights blinking weakly as if waking up just to inform them that they had mere seconds before a historical explosion vaporized them all. Jackson's hands were a blur, pushing the engines to their very limits. Their battered ship screamed forward past the final layer of wreckage, out into open sky. Just as the entire battleship behind them detonated in a glorious, fiery inferno, the shockwave flung their ship forward. Jackson barely kept them in control, the flames licking at their engines as they spiraled into the sky. Behind them, the surviving Celestian fighters had not been so lucky. Silence fell in the cockpit. Jackson let out a slow, shuddering breath. We're alive. Nova cracked his knuckles. That was exhilarating. Jackson turned to him, completely deadpan. I hate you. Nova grinned. No, you don't. Jackson slumped in his seat, staring blankly ahead. I need a drink. Before Nova could respond, the AI flickered to life again. New transmission received. Origin unknown. Jackson frowned. Oh, now what? The transmission crackled, and then an unfamiliar voice, smooth and dripping with amusement. Well, well, that was quite the show, gentlemen, but I'm afraid you've made quite a mess. Jackson felt his stomach drop. I don't like this, the voice continued. You see, the Celestian Dominion doesn't take kindly to fugitives, and neither do I. But I'm feeling generous, so here's the deal. A pause. Surrender Nova, and maybe I'll let you live. Jackson stared at the console, then at Nova. Nova's eyes narrowed. His claws flexed. Jackson sighed. Yeah, he muttered. I definitely need that drink. Jackson Ferris had a lot of personal rules. One of them was never negotiate. with someone who calls you gentleman in a sinister tone. Another was, if someone offers to let you live, assume they're lying. This situation violated both. The transmission crackled again, the voice impossibly smooth. I'll give you a moment to consider your options, but don't take too long. The Dominion may have lost their hunting party, but trust me, I'm far more efficient. Jackson exhaled through gritted teeth, hands tightening around the ship's barely functional control panel. All right, creepy mystery guy, let's pretend I'm dumb and don't know who you are. A chuckle. That's adorable. Jackson ignored it. Since you clearly have the upper hand, why not do the decent thing and introduce yourself before making hilariously unrealistic demands? Nova leaned in, eyes locked on the blinking comm signal, muscles taut with the kind of readiness that suggested he was 1 second away from ripping something in half. Jackson could appreciate the enthusiasm, but he would very much prefer to not get into another shootout inside his own ship. The voice sighed, like a teacher exhausted with an underperforming student. Oh, fine. You may call me Ravik. I'm an independent contractor. Jackson made a face. You mean bounty hunter? Ravik let out a small, almost amused hum. Such an ugly term. Nova's claws flexed against the metal panel. The Celestian Dominion must be desperate if they hired you. Jackson turned to him with a frown. You know this guy? Nova didn't look away from the transmission. Ravik is effective. I'll take that as a compliment, Ravik purred, but enough pleasantries. I'm a practical man, and I don't like wasting time. Hand over the war beast, and I'll let you walk away. Jackson rubbed his temples. Okay. Let's pretend for a second that I want to do that. Nova shot him a sharp look. Jackson held up a hand. I don't. I'm just saying hypothetically. He turned back to the console. What's stopping you from blasting me into space dust the second I hit transfer? A brief pause. Trust, Ravik said smoothly. Jackson let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Oh, sure. Let me just trust the guy who opened negotiations with surrender or die. Nova finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Enough of this. Jackson barely had time to react before Nova slammed his fist down on the comms panel, cutting the transmission. Jackson shot up from his chair. What the hell, man? Nova turned to him, deadly calm. Talking was pointless, Jackson flailed. That's literally all I have. I don't have claws. I don't have super strength. I just have bad negotiation skills and a vague sense of self-preservation. Nova pointed at the console. He was tracking us. The longer we spoke, the easier it was for him to pinpoint our location. Jackson opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Okay, fine, that's actually a good point. Nova turned away, rolling his shoulders. We need to leave. Jackson sighed. Great idea. Just one small, tiny, microscopic problem. Nova raised a brow. Jackson gestured around them. I have nowhere to go. The ship's systems were barely holding together after their last completely reckless stunt. They were still deep in Celestian-controlled space, and now they had one of the most feared bounty hunters in the sector breathing down their necks. Nova, unfazed, tapped a claw against the control panel. There's a place. Jackson's gut twisted. A place? Nova nodded. Shadows drift. Jackson's brain short-circuited for a full 3 seconds. You mean the lawless black market smuggler haven where every crime syndicate in the galaxy operates without consequences? Yes. Jackson stared at him. You want to hide in the single worst place to hide? Nova's lips curled in the smuggest, most infuriating grin Jackson had ever seen. They won't expect it, Jackson groaned, burying his face in his hands. Why do I listen to you? Nova clapped him on the back, hard enough to almost break Jackson's spine. Because I'm usually right. Jackson grumbled something unrepeatable and slammed the ship into a course toward certain doom. They arrived at Shadow's Drift 12 hours later, limping into the dark underbelly of the most dangerous den of scum and villainy in the sector. Jackson had been here once before, And that experience had ended with him running for his life, while a 7-foot reptilian crime lord screamed something about repaying his debts in blood. He had not been eager to return. The place hadn't changed. The spaceport was a chaotic mess. Ships of every possible size and legality crammed into tight docking zones, neon signs flickering erratically, and the air thick with the smell of engine. Grease, cheap liquor, and bad decisions. Jackson shut down the engines and slumped in his seat. I hate this plan. Jackson groaned. Of course it's Ravik, because the universe isn't done kicking me in the teeth. Gorik's anger flickered into mild confusion as he glanced between Jackson and the descending warship. Wait, Ravik is after you? Jackson let out a weak chuckle. Yep, Gorik frowned. The Ravik, as in never fails to kill his target Ravik? Jackson sighed. Yeah, that one. Gorik turned off his plasma pistol. All right, debt's forgiven. Jackson blinked. What? Gorik pointed at the incoming warship. If he's hunting you, you're already dead. I won't waste my time. Jackson threw up his hands. Oh, now you're being reasonable. Nova, meanwhile, was already moving. Without waiting for permission or giving Jackson a chance to argue, he grabbed Jackson by the scruff of his jacket and hauled him backward. Jackson yelped, Hey, can we at least pretend I have autonomy? No, Nova said simply, tossing him behind a stack of cargo crates. The warship landed hard, its landing struts slamming against the ground, like a predator pouncing on its prey. A moment later, the ship's ramp descended. Out stepped Ravik. Jackson had seen bounty hunters before. He'd even managed to outrun a few, but Ravik was different. Dressed in a long black combat coat reinforced with armor plating, Ravik moved, with the kind of predatory grace that said he'd already killed 4 people today, and it wasn't even lunchtime. His face was partially obscured by a sleek, matte black mask, but Jackson didn't need to see his expression to feel the absolute certainty that this guy did not mess around. The crowd instinctively backed away. Even the worst criminals in the galaxy knew when to let someone else handle the killing. Ravik descended the ramp, boots clicking against the metal, and stopped in the center of the spaceport. His masked face tilted slightly, scanning, searching. Then, in a voice cold enough to freeze fire, he said, Nova. Jackson, still half shoved behind the cargo crates, whispered, So, do we just, play dead? Maybe he has bad eyesight? Nova ignored him. Ravik took another step forward. You made me work for this. I don't like working. Nova cracked his knuckles. Then leave. Ravik chuckled. Tempting, but no. He turned slightly. I assume you're the Jackson Ferris I've heard about? Jackson, against all common sense, gave him a little 2-finger salute. That'd be me. And before you say anything, yes, I know I'm a dead man walking. Ravik inclined his head slightly. Good. I do appreciate when my targets understand the situation. Jackson swallowed. Would you appreciate it more if I just walked away, no trouble? Ravik considered this. Then he pulled out a very large gun. Jackson sighed. Didn't think so. Nova moved first. With terrifying speed, the war beast lunged, not away, not to cover, but straight at Ravik. The bounty hunter had barely enough time to raise his gun before Nova closed the distance, claws flashing. What happened next was a blur of violence. Nova swung. Ravik dodged. A plasma bolt barely missed Nova's head. A crate exploded behind them. The crowd scattered. Ravik moved like liquid shadow, dodging every strike with surgical precision. Nova was fast, brutal, relentless, but Ravik was faster. Jackson, meanwhile, had exactly one plan. Run. As Ravik and Nova tore into each other, Jackson scrambled back, toward the ship, leaping over crates and broken cargo. Nova had bought him seconds, which was exactly what he needed. Reaching the ship's ramp, Jackson slammed his hand onto the emergency override panel. The engines rumbled to life. Nova! He shouted. Nova heard him. With a final bone-rattling impact, Nova slammed a foot into the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Ravik blinked, momentarily blinded. That was all Nova needed. He launched himself backward, twisting in mid-air, and landed directly in the ship's loading bay. Jackson didn't wait. He slapped the hatch controls. The ramp slammed shut. Then he gunned the engines. The ship lurched into the air, barely missing the warship behind them. Below, through the viewport, Jackson saw Ravik watching them go, calm, unbothered. Like this wasn't over. Jackson swallowed hard. "Well," he exhaled. "That sucked." Nova cracked his knuckles. "He'll come after us." Jackson groaned. "Yeah, but that's tomorrow's problem. For now, they were alive.